This may sound a little paranoid, but we're going to go with it anyways. In that, yesterday I was reading in medical news about an individual who's using the Human Genome Project, mapping out this person's DNA to determine whether certain drugs would be more or less effective on this individual. Sounds like an interesting idea. It'd be nice to have tailor-made medicines to improve our general health. But the first thing that came to my mind was not the positive. What came to mind was one word: Gattaca. You see, once the genie is out of the bottle, what if that information, now that it's been determined, falls into the wrong hands? We live in a fairly mobile society. We don't necessarily keep the same doctor from cradle to grave. We move around, circumstances change and such like that. And if it's part of our medical record, this mapping out of our genes and determining what drugs work and don't work, or worse yet, our propensity to develop illness, whether it be cancer, heart disease, and so forth, if that information will fall into the wrong hands, it can create a devastating effect within our society. And that's where Gattaca came in. It's a science fiction movie that looked at this, from, probably over a decade ago. You see, people were classified as whether or not their genes were, well, at best or the optimum, as opposed to those who had genetic flaws. And in that society, it becomes so stratified. I'm a fan of dystopian literature, and Gattaca was a dystopia. Those people who didn't have perfect genes were discriminated against. Well, I'm not necessarily saying that that's what's going to happen, but consider what might happen. Imagine how insurance companies would look at risk assessment if they're looking at somebody who has a high propensity toward disease. I see the rates going up, or coverage being rejected. Yes, I know, with healthcare reform, nobody can be rejected, but they can certainly raise up the premiums. Of course, we also have this push toward electronic record keeping, so that for sake of efficiency, and without having to reinvent the wheel from doctor to doctor, have some central database. Yes, the government database, which means they will now know, from our Gattaca reports, who has got the best genes and who does not. Again, if it falls in the wrong hands, we've got a serious problem. My paranoia is, maybe unfounded. But I also run on the premise that no good deed goes unpunished. And is it possible that as the technology improves and it gets cheaper and cheaper, that there'll be now a new weapon to kind of thin out the herd between those people that are people and those people who, for no other reason than bad genes, are not people? Who gets coverage, who gets venerated in our society, and who gets ghettoized. Yes, it may sound far-fetched, but if that information falls in the wrong hands, we really don't know how it's going to be used or misused. So maybe it's something we need to consider very carefully about ourselves, about our society, and about simply human nature itself.